Hi, welcome to our second segment. I'm Judy Nathans.
And I'm Robert Winters. We have another guest.
Yes.
Good evening.
Yes.
Josh Burgin. Josh Burgin is a candidate for Cambridge City Council.
Right.
That's correct.
Right, and I'll do my traditional joke. Since if you're watching this in the archives in the year 2027,
Right.
way back in 2017 he was a candidate, right?
Way back in
Way back in
2017. Exactly.
Yeah. So anyway, Cambridge City Council candidate, and actually it's exactly 4 weeks from tonight is election day.
Oh, dear.
Exactly 4
Wow.
weeks from tonight. That's correct.
And I got a postcard in the mail today from you.
I love it.
Yeah, so,
I love it.
things are happening. It's really true.
Starting up.
So, first thing I think people need to understand about candidates before we talk about issues and all that stuff is just who are you? Where are you from? What you about?
Yeah, where'd you come from? How'd you
So
get
the
here?
human before you were the candidate.
Right.
Before I was a candidate, I
Yeah.
grew up in a large ag family in Florida.
Wow.
My grandfather was a 35-year produce buyer for the A&P company.
Wow.
When he retired from A&P in the late 70s, he started his own business. My father went to work there. Every one of my 6 siblings and I worked in the family business for a while. It's where we were taught sort of initial values of community and hard work and commitment to service, these sorts of things. My grandfather
This
was
is
a big
all in
piece of-
Florida.
That's correct.
Mhm.
That's correct. My parents chose a somewhat unusual educational path in the 1980s. They homeschooled, which opened a door for me to spend my senior year of high school in Russia, where I taught
Wow.
English and American history at school number 31 at Yugoslav in Moscow.
It's
Goodness.
interesting that our previous guest in the last half hour taught in China.
China, right.
And
Now
now
we're in
we're
Russia, right.
Well, I tell you, as a bit of
Interesting.
how would I say it? I mean, I'm not a redneck, but I grew up in an agricultural community.
Yeah.
I didn't have a lot of sort of international exposure
Right.
until that moment.
Yeah.
And I
That's
can remember
amazing.
standing
Wow.
in the airport, a very dark airport at Sheremetyevo in the fall of
Well, what year was
1993.
So
It was September of 1993.
What was the...
Yeltsin was president,
Yeltsin,
and it was
okay.
just a few months before the second coup where they sent tanks on the White
Oh.
House. And I'm standing there
Oh,
in
my
this
goodness.
very dark, very dingy airport thinking, oh, did I make a mistake? Because I'd signed up
Oh,
for a
my
9-month
goodness.
commitment.
Oh, my
Right.
goodness.
But nevertheless, I mean, this definitely expanded my worldview.
Sure.
It opened a whole range of doors. In fact,
Yeah.
it would, and we'll get to this later, it would lead to me ultimately marrying a Russian-speaking woman from Kazakhstan.
Oh, my
And
goodness.
it is
Wow.
why my household is bilingual and actively speaks both
Amazing.
English, Russian, some
Oh.
Kazakh, and my kids are studying Chinese.
Aha.
That is wonderful.
So how did this arc finally win its way to the
Cambridge.
People's Republic
Yeah,
of
right.
Oh,
Cambridge?
it's a long story. And if you had told me 10 years ago, in 2017, Josh,
Yeah.
you were going to be running for Cambridge City Council
Yeah,
in
you'd say, "You
Massachusetts,
crazy." Yeah.
I would have
Yeah.
said, in what world? This makes
Yeah.
no sense.
Right.
Wow.
It's a somewhat winding path, and we don't have time for all of it.
Right.
But I will summarize to say, from that early age,
Yeah.
I had, as a teenager, I'd spent some time in politics.
Mm-hmm.
As a teenager, I spent time on the produce docks packing zucchinis and
Right.
cucumbers, loading trucks. As a teenager, I spent time in
Yeah.
Russia, and this sort of cyclically led towards a
Yeah.
whole range of opportunities in my 20s, working for state government, working back in Russia in a travel business and some other
Oh,
things,
wow.
again with education, working for small business in terms of just operations, marketing,
But
all
where?
the
Is it
things.
still in Florida?
Well, I mean, this is a range of things. So
Sure.
part of it was with the family business in Florida.
Right.
Part of it was with a technology and computer company. Part of it was a deluxe high-end travel company focused on Russia and Eastern Europe.
Wow.
Part of that was time again spent in Russia, repeated trips back to the former Soviet
So
Union.
you've really been doing a lot. Wow.
Ultimately, if we jump ahead, again, I spent time working for a county commissioner in Hillsborough County, Florida, worked for state legislature there, was director for a democracy project in Kazakhstan in 2005, was there, I would meet my wife. So a whole range of things.
So just
the
12
resume
years
is,
ago, okay.
yeah. It's,
But I saw Harvard somewhere in there. So
yeah,
how
Harvard
did
did.
Harvard
Harvard
get in
came up. So
there? Okay.
because of the homeschool background,
Right.
for whatever the reason, the Florida university system had a problem with matriculation with homeschoolers in the early 90s.
Huh.
They just didn't know how to do it.
You're
Yeah.
not standing.
That has all changed. But at the time,
Yeah.
it was a barrier, and I stood in line. This is pre-internet, so you took
Yeah.
your social security card
Yeah.
and stood in line and stood in line and stood in line, and the doors were fairly closed. At some point,
Yeah.
I said, "This isn't working," so I quit. But at some point, we'd faced some challenges. It was the bottom of the economy in 2012. My wife said to me, "Honey, you're the brightest guy I've ever met, but you have this one gap in your resume, and you need to fix it." So I somewhat ate humble pie, went back to school,
Right.
hustled out a 4-year degree in 2.
Wow.
And as
So you
I
hadn't
was-
gone to college up until
I had
then?
not.
Amazing.
So I'd served on I was serving on the transit agency board at that point,
Yeah.
overseeing the budget, overseeing issues around healthcare, all the stuffs that go with overseeing
Sure.
a good sized 800 employee government agency. And I interviewed the HR director because I was doing a final paper for one of my classes for school. And as we were talking, I was telling him I was thinking about next steps. And he looked me straight in the eyes and said, Josh, you have to go to Harvard.
Yeah.
Now, again, this is a boy from Plant City, Florida. And I thought, people like me don't go to Harvard. He said, no, I want you to promise me today. And this was a guy that I only knew sort of notionally. African-American fellow. He took hold of my hand, refused to let me leave his office that day until I promised to call Harvard.
Story.
And I don't know how, but I ended up on the phone with Emma Haffern at the Kennedy School. I was thinking about how do joint degrees work, and she was on the phone. She spent about 40 minutes with me. She said, Josh, she said, I know you're working on the final bits of your degree. I know you're trying to keep GPA up, but it would be worth the 40 to 50 hours worth of time for you to put in for an application. We'd be interested to read your stuff.
Amazing.
And so they accepted, and it saved me from going to law school. So this was the catalyst that moved us here. And frankly, in that moment, in that first sort of few months, there was a few months of you sort of pinch yourself. Are we really here?
Yeah.
Did
you already had kids by then?
We did. We had two. My mother-in-law lived with us. My wife from Kazakh, half of the family from Tastak outside of Almaty. My two kids, and we fell in love. I mean, this was the community that embraced our multicultural, multilingual, multi-religious confession sort of household in a way that no other place I had ever been did, and no other place I could imagine would. And this became home. It was just almost instantaneous.
Amazing.
Well, now that has to be, for me, brings up the question then. All right, so what possesses you then to want to seek a seat on the Cambridge City Council?
So as I was watching the community and I was watching what was happening in City Hall, there was some things that, I mean, this is an amazing community. It's a globally significant, Cambridge is globally significant. There's no question, when you look out at Cambridge, 110,000 people, if it weren't for the two institutions on both sides, it could be middle America somewhere, and there wouldn't be a significant difference. But that's not the case. Right. We have an audience that the entire world comes through here, whether you're talking political leadership, business leadership, and at times it feels as though this community is on the cusp of being great, but there's things about sort of tradition that hold it back. And I'm not talking radical things, but I was shocked at the number of crosswalks I saw that simply lacked signage. Even in Russia and in Kazakhstan, I didn't see that to the same degree.
What do you mean by signage? Like stripes on the street?
I mean, stripes on the streets, or just eye-level signage for drivers that have to stop. And because we're drawing people from all over the world, if you have inconsistencies, if we don't have consistency around intersections, around these were sort of things that really jumped out. If there was something that got me out of my seat, it was around how all the modalities of transportation intersect, and sometimes it's not very harmonious. And I believe that some reasonable sort of make lists and methodically work through them scenarios could help to fix that. And it doesn't require a multi-million-dollar consultant to do it. This is what got me off my seat. But as I was thinking about how would I approach a campaign, how would I approach reaching out to and sort of communicating ideas, it really crossed my mind as I've seen numerous campaigns with the 3-point plan. They come, they knock on your door, hi, my name is so-and-so, and I'm going to do these 3 things. It struck me that, Josh, perhaps the better approach would be to go ask. And so as I've knocked on doors around town, the approach has been more along the lines of, my name is Josh Burgin, but I'm here to knock on your door to find out what it is that you would like. If there was 1 or 2 things in your mind that we could do to improve the city, or if there's something the council needs to know about your specific neighborhood, what is it? And the feedback has been incredible, and I've been really impressed.
Let us know, what is the feedback?
So you can imagine, obviously, affordable veteran housing has come up a lot. And we've talked about affordable housing, capital A, capital H. And in some cases, that's what the respondents mean. In other cases, they mean, I've got a kid that just graduated from college. They're making $70,000 a year, and they can't afford to live here.
Yeah, well,
it's
all housing.
There is sort of capital A affordable housing, which usually means regulated housing basically provided through some means, versus what I looked for when I first moved here in 1978, which was an affordable place to live.
Which is I want to make that distinction, because while I hear affordable housing a lot, when you dig in and ask the secondary question, what do you mean by that? It often becomes housing affordability as opposed to the capital A, capital H.
Meaning to apply to the housing authority to get on this.
Exactly. Obviously, we've heard things around education. I've also heard a range of things about Josh, fix my park, and that can mean anything
Fix
from
my park.
there's something dangerous that's a risk to my kids to there's not enough space for my dog to walk. There's been a number of conversations around water fountains. It's been interesting to hear how the sort of granular issues change as you go from neighborhood to neighborhood.
You know, this doesn't surprise me in the least because I've seen this from multiple election cycles where candidates sometimes in a very top-down way try and say, or organizations say, these are the issues,
Right.
everybody behave
And we
listen,
support these candidates
we're
because
telling
we
you.
support our issues.
Whereas
Yeah.
if you actually talk to human beings,
Yeah.
they say a completely different other story.
If I had to be very candid, the things that I was seeing at City Hall, the things I was watching about issues percolating in City Hall, don't necessarily align as much with what I'm finding in neighborhoods as you
So
might
you're
imagine.
saying they're not as crazy about the bicycles then?
I would say that you have a fairly divided sort of,
Definitely. Yeah.
you have some that I would say that if I had to purely generalize, most people want to see bicyclists in this city have safe
Right.
access to the roadbed.
Right.
But there have been some legitimate, in my view, critiques
Yeah, I agree.
around how some of the execution
Sure.
has taken place.
Yeah.
There have been legitimate questions from
Right.
pedestrian only residents, older ones who say, Josh, I don't feel I can cross these things safely.
Yeah.
I don't feel as though the
Yeah.
bicyclists follow all of the rules. I like
That's
bikes.
true.
I've ridden
Yeah.
a bike. I'm a pedestrian. I don't drive a car to speak of. And I'm sort of mindful of
Yeah.
changes, positive changes we can make, but I'm also mindful that I was sitting at the light the other day at Inman and bicycle after bicycle blew through the red light and then weaved
Really?
in and out of the cars that are making
Wow.
that are legitimately making the right then as they dogleg from Inman onto Pleasant, making that dogleg. They're then weaving through without
I thought
acknowledging.
Inman has all that new infrastructure, no?
It's right on Mass
in the
Ave.
square? Or
I'm
in
talking
the
about
street?
Inman,
Oh,
Inman here on
Inman
Mass
Street.
Ave. So you've got
Okay,
the red
not
light,
Inman
the
Square.
bicyclists drive
Yeah.
right through the
I know
through the
what you-
light
yeah,
at Inman,
Yeah.
and
Well,
they then weave through the cars that are
There's
legitimate.
as much at
on
fault
the
of some
light.
bicyclists as there are drivers. I mean, that's the problem, and pedestrians who are, on their earphones and not watching.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
education has so much to do with it, but there's just so much you can do, and
There have been some
Yeah.
feedback too that I think is somewhat legitimate around the number of parking places that have disappeared through bike lanes, and there's been very little conversation that I can find
Yeah.
that has addressed how do we replace, if at all, some of those parking spaces. I know there are some folks who say we don't need to worry about cars any longer, but I am of the view
that's insane.
that the chariot has existed since the Romans and it's not going away
But
anytime
also
soon.
delivery trucks, people have to,
All
stores
of
have to
those
get
things.
all that stuff. And also the thing about the parking lanes I've read, which is true, like somebody has to get out of their car, cross the bike lane to put in money into the meter.
That's
and
true
if
too.
they're older,
I'm just wondering what's going to happen when somebody has to make a delivery and they have to drop a ramp.
Oh,
Right? and they're
Oh,
parked out in
God.
the middle of the street and then they have to
Oh,
get
yeah.
over to the sidewalk.
So
yeah.
these issues were sort of expected. The one that surprised me the most is particularly here in mid-Cambridge and Cambridgeport,
Yeah.
the number of people that reported rats in large numbers
yeah.
as a significant issue.
It's a big
So when I
issue.
Yeah,
first
but-
started, I was
okay,
surprised,
so
and then
what- but
probably
what-
25 households.
yeah, but where they put it? Well, okay, now we're getting into these are my issues. It's like we have a 150-gallon trash we can put out. We're one of the few. It's too much. Okay, so you're going to get rats when you put out food waste in pails or in 4 days before your pickup, and if you're not watching your when there's holes in the bottom, the rats are going to get in there. I went on a rat walk with Craig Kelly, and I learned a lot. And a lot of it is education to the household, but it's also there's just so much the city can do. Rats have been around for thousands of years,
No question.
Right.
and so you've got to change behaviors.
So the feedback that I heard was
So
not
what-
so much, Josh, you need to fix our rat problem. The feedback was more along the lines of, we've seen a noticed uptick. We're doing what we can to try to remediate, but we would appreciate if there was a more systemic approach where
Right.
if there's a vendor, if there's a sort of global approach to the vendors that are going to provide rat poison boxes, if indeed if there's construction related, then are all the
It's
all
not.
the folks
That's a myth,
engaging
by the way.
in
It's not
construction
construction related.
going ahead and putting in.
Well,
This is the general conversation.
I know,
I've
but I'm
heard.
just saying.
I've had some doubts, but no, that's what
right.
I've heard.
I think the
Right.
city council has not taken a step on that, and if you do get in, I would hope you would. We have to change the or whatever it is, an ordinance or something. People do not need to put out. That's equivalent to 5 trash barrels,
Right.
32
Well,
gallon.
it'll be interesting to see how it plays out when we
Yeah,
get
we're
to
having
citywide
curbside compost
curbside
in April,
coming
right.
in April.
Yeah.
citywide, and that may actually make things better. But if badly managed, it could make things worse.
Right.
So I think there's going to be a lot of intense
They're attracted to
focus on
food when
that.
they can't get something to eat, and rat traps are, that may be down the line, but that's not gonna.
Yeah.
I liked what Rabbi Hershey said at Shabbat House on Banks. He said,
Yeah.
Josh, if our garbage receptacles were as rigid as our recycling receptacles, this would go a long way
Right.
towards
that's
remediation, which I thought was not a
That's
bad
true.
idea.
Right.
Well,
But it's interesting though, there is this sort of like real bread and butter stuff,
Absolutely.
day to day on the street when you hear people talking, they're probably not talking about the Volpe Center. They're probably
No,
talking about
the
their
rat,
kids,
yeah.
and they're probably talking about the difficulty in driving on Fresh Pond Parkway.
Absolutely.
Whatever. There's these real things that real people think about much more frequently than they do
Yeah.
these sort of big urban planning things.
Well, and to that end, this is why I felt it was so important to go knock on doors. And that's not just in my neighborhood. I'm very proud to be able to tell you
and
at this
where's
point.
your neighborhood? by
I
the
live
way?
in Cambridgeport. I live
Oh, wow.
near the Whole Foods at River and Memorial,
Okay.
or River and Putnam.
So did our last one. So do I.
And then Jacob is just across the street, in fact.
Oh, really?
Literally,
Okay.
we could almost play baseball
Oh, wow,
from the front of my
that's-
building to the entrance to his apartment.
And actually, there's another city council candidate also in your building, Sam Gebru, right?
Sam isn't. He's on the
Same
sixth,
building,
sixth
yeah.
floor.
Oh,
I'm on
so
14.
You,
There you
you
go.
are, okay, all
In fact, I
right.
just met him for the first time the other day. Coming home, I'm like, oh, well, there's Sam. Hey, candidate.
There you go, right?
But yeah, I wanted to make the point that I'm quite proud that
Yeah.
I have now knocked on doors in all 11 wards. And
Yeah.
this was a profound value to me, that those who put themselves forward to represent, it's incumbent upon them to seek out those that they represent
Yeah.
and to find their issues. And that's not just in one neighborhood or two, that's across the city. These are citywide seats. We don't have districted races in Cambridge,
Right.
and I see good reason for that. But if indeed they're citywide seats, then in my view, the members or the candidates need to treat them as such and,
Right.
and walk citywide, which
Right.
we've worked really hard to do that,
Yeah.
and I'm proud of that.
One of the things that I've actually noticed over the years is that in the springtime and summertime of an election year, the incumbent city councilors, when they're filing their orders at city council meetings,
Right.
the number of sort of what you might thought of more maintenance-oriented things like rotten streets, these kinds of problems, just day-to-day stuff, it soars because they're going around knocking doors, and this is what people are saying to them.
I've noticed that a few of my issues on my 25 ideas list that I've been working on are being literally solved as we speak. So at some point,
That's right.
somebody's going to come along and say,
Yeah.
well, Josh, I got this thing in the mail from you, and it said that you were going to work on this, but the council just did
Yeah.
it. You're $80 short. Well, printing costs and lag delays, I'll own it. It's just one of the things that I heard while
Right.
knocking on doors.
No, but I think it really does sort of prove that, in
Yeah.
fact, just actually going out and listening to people actually gives you a very different conversation than what we usually treated to at Sullivan.
So let me tell you a brief
Yeah.
story about my wife
Yeah.
and I in our courtship phase.
Yeah.
We had met, we weren't quite in the serious dating stage,
Yeah.
and I remember asking her, I'm in
This is in
Almaty,
Russia.
Kazakhstan.
And 'cause
In Almaty, Kazakhstan,
Yeah.
we're driving down Abaya or one of the main streets,
Yeah.
and we're in the back of a taxi, and I'm asking her, what do you do? Who do you reach out to when there's something wrong? When there's a pothole, when there's a stop sign that's come down, when a traffic light isn't working? And she responded to me, and it's funny in a macabre sort of way. She responded, she said, oh, Josh, she said, if you have a small issue like that, you'll be ignored.
Right.
And if you have a big issue, you'll commit suicide.
Oh, gosh.
Now, this is, again,
In other societies, you know who to bribe.
this is
Well,
true, but I guess
yeah.
the point I want to make is
Yeah.
that in this environment, in the democracy that is the United States, with representative at local level governance, where in many parts of the world there's no recourse.
Right.
The fact that we do have elections every 2 years, the fact that candidates do knock on doors, the fact that other candidates are challenging them, nipping at their heels, keeping
Yeah.
them knocking on doors, does so much to adjust and make our life better. And it reinforces for me why that's so important, why it's important to maintain those cultures and those values, and why at times it's important to share that with others to the extent that we can.
Absolutely.
Wow.
So I guess I was
We
gonna.
should send you to the White House or something. You could straighten out this whole Russian thing.
You know what? I have 2 young children.
Yeah?
I'm quite content to work
Okay.
at the city
All
level.
right.
Local level
All right.
politics has
Yeah.
always been my area of
Now,
interest.
do you have any point of view or opinions on some of the sort of the issues of the day that are before us? Like if you follow what happens at city council on any given week to
Housing,
week, right
yeah.
now they always talk about housing. They went on
Zoning,
about inclusionary zoning.
Right.
There were changes. The Volpe site is coming down here. There are various zoning petitions. I mean, are these things that you follow or have a point of view about, or?
I'm following them for sure, but I'm also rational that there's a finite period of time I didn't declare a year and a half ago.
Right.
I declared relatively late. And so the notion that you're educated, that you're well informed on how systems generally work, but to wade in and get too deep in the weeds at this stage, at this point, I need to communicate to folks that I'm thoughtful, that I have a general understanding of how government functions and how it works across agencies in a somewhat complicated manner, and how to then to go and activate and make for positive reforms. I'm aware of the Volpe Center. I'm happy that it represents new housing units that are coming along. I believe that affordable housing or housing affordability are things that we have to work at, but I also don't believe there's a magic wand. These things are incremental. I served on a metropolitan planning organization board at some point in the past, and one of the first things they did was send us for training. And in that training, they said, Josh, understand that every major endeavor that you'll take on with government, and this was particularly around transportation and planning around transportation. If you start it today, it's 20 years before you cut the ribbon. So you will be gone, you will no longer be in office, and I'm mindful that incremental change is the way our government tends to work, and there's very few exceptions.
It's actually very true in this level here. I mean, I've known city council, some of the most popular candidate people who are the top vote getters, people you might think of who are going to have extra oomph, extra authority. They had to work very methodically for years
Correct.
to get some of them, just a little thing like they really want a youth center or something like that.
Yeah.
You didn't just have a vote and have it just magically appear. There's a lot of convincing that goes on, and there's just a lot of legwork. It's not an instantaneous thing. I've often felt that really the best qualification of any city councilor is to not come in with a preset notion about all that is to be,
And this is what we can
but
get
is
done.
basically to just come in as a good representative and who knows how to handle themselves in the job as everything arises, and to help steer the ship. But it's not, so I'm not gonna, so I guess I'm sort of agreeing with you on this, is that I don't necessarily think it's a good thing when candidates sort of come in with hellfire, vote for me and I'm going to immediately make this, that, the other thing happen. So anyway.
I've just seen it doesn't work. I mean, I remember there's another story I wanted to work into this conversation. I worked for a candidate that ran for county commission at some point in the past, and he was elected. It was the second time around. He pulled it out the second time, and I remember him walking down the hallway of the county commission building and having a senior member stop him and take him by the elbow and look him in the eyes and say, "Congratulations, this is an amazing, fantastic day for you and your family." But the reality is, if you want to come back here in 4 years, you'll continue to knock on doors each week along the way. And one of the other sort of macro level things that I've been hearing as I've knocked on doors is, Josh, I get a lot of candidates who knock on my doors when it's election time, but I don't see them afterwards.
Yep.
And I'm committed not just in terms of my commitments to voters, but in terms of my overall ethos that get elected. And if you want to get lost in the room, you're welcome to. But if you want to stay grounded, you'll continue to knock on doors, probably 100 doors a week, in order to stay connected to what's happening throughout the city. And this is a value that's also very much ingrained in what I hope to do.
I think this is what Tip O'Neill actually meant when he said all politics is local.
I'm sure that's true.
It meant when you're back in the district, you go to your barbershop, you talk to the barber, you go shopping at the supermarket, you talk to the people like that, and you sort of get a sense of your district.
Well, and the risk is, I think often people look at this, we're going to host coffees, or we're going to host these informal get-togethers, and you get the STPs. Do you know the STPs? The same 10 people?
Oh, okay.
The same 10 people show up, and they're the ones that are involved in the Chamber of Commerce, they're the ones that are lobbying, they're the ones that are sort of involved in community, but in fact, often, those are not the voices, those are overrepresented voices.
You're right.
And unless you're going outside of that circuit, you're missing an important constituency that won't be heard because they're busy working 3 jobs to keep a roof over their heads, to put shoes on the kids' feet, making sure to get the kids to school on time, etc. And this is a constituency that can't be forgotten along the way.
I mean, there's a lot of neighborhood organizations that have like monthly meetings. You could, counselors that you can ask to go to some of those, which is good.
But you're actually kind of right in that a lot of the neighborhood associations, some are better than others, and some of them are just the same 10 people, and they are not necessarily representative of the neighborhoods they say they represent either. So, it's not easy.
All of these levels are important. Don't get me wrong. I don't have any negative feeling about these organizations. They're valuable as well. But if you stop there, you're missing a constituency that you need to continue to talk to. That you have to go out of your way, and it's uncomfortable and it's hard. And I mean, there's many days now. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It's time to go knock on doors, and you make there's a temptation to make excuses to not. How much more so when you're in office? But I understand that if you're to be successful in the long term, you'll continue to seek out feedback from those you're serving.
Right. Even little things like elected officials, when they can have their coffee their office
You need it
hours
in a
at the
coffee
local
house,
donut shop
yeah,
and whatever.
in a non-election year, that's
My
the
wife said
important
to me,
thing.
she's like,
Yeah.
she remembers growing up in Kazakhstan where they had monthly community cleanups. And we've talked about the notion of how do we continue sort of engaged, and might we plug in with some of the existing community cleanups? What might we do sort of as an incentive? And I've actually thought about cotton candy as a means of sort of the favor exchange, right? Come help clean up, and so the kid or the kid at heart can get some cotton candy as a reward for community participation. It's community building. It's all good stuff that you can do.
Judy and I have a long history with recycling, but the thing is, for me, the biggest experience of community building I ever had was working with volunteers and getting recycling going.
Of course.
Right? That was more important than everything else combined in many ways. So.
And you have strong legacy from that, I have no doubt.
Absolutely.
Oh, he
That's
helped
fantastic.
start it, yeah.
Yeah, it goes back a long, long way.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we only got a minute and a half something to go here. So how about you make your pitch? So now this is your opportunity to
Why should
talk
you get a
directly
number one
to-
vote?
Right, and it's remember
number
one.
one. Yeah.
Right?
Number one it is. So as I'm looking at you, as we're talking this evening, I want you to make believe that I'm standing on your doorstep. That I've just knocked on your door and you grimace just a little bit because you don't know who's there, and you open their door and it's me, it's Josh Burgin. And as I look at you, I ask you, said, we all love living in Cambridge, but if there were one or two things that we could do to improve our city, or if there was something that the council needs to know about your neighborhood in particular, what would it be? Now, I know you're not here to give me the answer to that question, but when I knock on your door, you can. Or if you reach out to me through the website or through my email address, you can. You've been getting things in the mail from me. You've been seeing things, and I want to hear, I really genuinely want to hear what your interests are, because I want to represent those interests. This is why I'd be honored to receive your number one vote. Not because I have all the answers, but because I'm willing to serve and to represent your interests on the city council.
Wow, excellent.
I think that's about as good and right
that I've heard, yeah,
Well,
really.
I appreciate you giving me
So-
the opportunity
Well,
to
it's
speak
been
to this
great
morning.
having
Go to your candidates page
Alrighty.
on Robert's site.
So we'll
Yep.
see you again next week on Cambridge Inside Out.
Bye.